I really like it when Supercell introduces new and original game modes, something that are a little bit different from what we're used to playing. I was really happy with Heist mode. Don't get me wrong, Touchdown was a bit of a flop. Personally, I wasn't too happy with it, but I am really happy with the newest mode that they introduced, which is the Hog Race Challenge mode. It's really cool, it's really fun, and it's in honor of the Lunar New Year, which this year is actually the Year of the Pig. Now, shout out to Andreas TM13 here. He's actually the one who kind of shared this deck on Reddit and founded it in a sense for everybody else. And you can see his post here on Reddit. So credit goes to that guy. Alright everybody, let's give you the obligatory what's cracking everybody. Welcome back to Gaming 101 with Mr. Berger. I'm trying to switch it up with these intros a little bit so you don't hear the same thing at the beginning of every video. But if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. Leave it a like if you enjoyed this video, and leave a comment in the comment section below. I'll be giving you guys shout outs, in the comment of the day from time to time, especially if you leave a nice one. So I cover decks like this all the time with special events, special challenges, meta decks, off meta decks, balance changes, all kinds of cool stuff like that. So tonight we're going to be taking a look at the Lunar New Year event, which is kind of like, I think it's the Hog Race Challenge is what the official name of it is. And as I mentioned, I found this deck online on Reddit, so shout out to that dude who founded it and kind of coined it for the rest of the internet here in the Clash Royale world. And it's worked out really, really well. As I mentioned, guys, I really like this mode. I'm really happy with it. I'm glad that they introduced another new game mode, just something a little bit different to kind of switch it up a little bit. And like I said, I was really happy with Heist, not so much with Touchdown, but with this one, I'm digging it so far. And honestly, I think the community is responding pretty well too in general. I feel like my clanmates and people that I hear from on Reddit and Twitter and stuff are, definitely enjoying this particular game mode a little bit better than, some of the alternatives, again, to say like Touchdown, right? Alright, so let's go into the actual strategy behind this deck, because that is what we're, going for tonight. So, it's a huge counter deck. And what you're going for basically is countering all those Royal Hogs and countering the kind of swarm meta that naturally comes with it. Look at this Lumberjack doing work on the right here, especially with the support of the Edrag there and the Hogs. And you can see, there's so much going on, especially as once the game progresses a little bit further. The Hogs spawn at a faster rate, and there's more of them. You can see that they only spawn one at a time at the beginning, and now there's 3 of them spawning at a time. We're at about 50 seconds left in the match here. So you really want to keep in mind it's a really big kind of swarm meta in this particular challenge. So naturally you want to counter that, and you'll notice that this deck has a lot of splash synergy. Well, actually, yeah, it does. It definitely does have some splash synergy with, like mostly the Bowler, the Mega Knight, and then even you could consider the spells and the Edrag to have a little bit of splash synergy. And then there's also some other stuff that kind of just stays in the back and stays alive for a long time. And I want to get into each card specifically because they all play a very vital role in this deck. And the guy that built this deck really thought it out. So again, props to him because it works out great in this challenge. So as I mentioned, to counter all those massive little piglets running around everywhere, or that massive number of little piglets running around everywhere, you've got a whole bunch of splash damage and a whole bunch of cards that just naturally do well in a kind of swarmy meta. So let's talk about the Bowler specifically first. I want to talk about each card in depth a little bit, but the Bowler is really important. And Bowler, I love the Bowler. He's one of my favorite cards now. And one of the reasons is he's kind of off meta, and he doesn't work super well in most traditional classic decks that you would see being run in grand challenges, classic challenges, on ladder, things like that. But you do see him from time to time in these kind of different metas when you have these special challenges or certain game modes, or sometimes even when there's just like a super swarmy meta, like for example when Royal Hogs were really rampant, when they were really strong, there was definitely some Bowler decks. And for a while, not so much right now I feel like, but for a while there was definitely a resurgence of splash yard decks that used the Bowler in the graveyard and poison or freeze or whatever, and like a tornado, all that splash energy. So this deck, it runs the Bowler naturally to counter the whole swarm meta that you're going to be going up against in this special challenge, and to naturally counter those Royal Hogs. I mean, he just is a counter to the Royal Hogs. He has splash damage, right? So he hits 2, 3, 4 of them at once. He pushes them back consistently. He's really beefy, so he stays alive. You know, they can't just like fireball him out like they would be able to do with a wizard, you know, fireball plus zap or whatever. So he's just a great card all around for this particular challenge. So definitely, you know, consider putting him in whatever deck you're going to use for this challenge. He works out great. Now the Electro Dragon. Well, yeah, let's talk about the Electro Dragon next, and then we'll go back to kind of the splash energy with the Mega Knight. The Electro Dragon, he kind of complements that Mega Knight. You know, the Mega Knight. Let's tie that in a little bit here. It really just goes hand in hand with the bowler. I mean, I don't really need to separate it too much. It's that whole splash synergy. They counter really well that swarm meta and those Royal Hogs. The Mega Knight, when he lands with the force of 1,000 mustaches or whatever it is in the description. You know, so he splits up the 3 or 4 hogs and then does splash damage to them as well. And you're going to be seeing just a whole massive buildup of units throughout this challenge, and he does really well against that. And the Edrag, as I was mentioning, he complements that Mega Knight really well because he kind of naturally supports it for a number of reasons. Mainly that he counters any sort of an Inferno Tower, an Inferno Dragon. And you're probably going to be seeing some Inferno Dragons and definitely some Sparkies in this challenge. So that Edrag is a nice card to have in there for that stun effect. Now look at the value of this flying machine early on, and then later on you can see an example of the value that the Mega Knight can potentially get in this challenge here. So as I mentioned, the Edrag, he stuns Inferno Dragons, Inferno Towers, he stuns Sparkies, anything that charges up like that. On top of that, he stays alive for a long time. He's got ranged attack, and he moves relatively slowly. So he and the flying machine, they both stay alive for a really long time, potentially, and that's another thing that I'm going to talk about a little bit more in depth as we go along here. But right now, I just want to point out how he complements that Mega Knight really well, and how the Mega Knight really counters the Hog meta, or the Swarm meta that you're going to be going up against here. Let's bridge on into that now. The fact that the flying machine and what else do we have in there? The Edrag and even the Bowler, like these are units that have the potential to live for a really long time. And because you have a consistent stream of hogs running down this challenge, you're going to be noticing that these units will often stay back, be sniping these hogs and whatever else your opponent has to support them, and live for a really long time, and you'll eventually be able to stack up multiple ones of them. So like the flying machine is the prime example. It stays really far back, it has really long range, it's air so it doesn't get targeted by a lot of ground units. You know, your opponent often ignores it, and you know, doesn't have like a fireball to fireball it out of the sky. And if they do, then you can capitalize on, you know, all the little piglets and the kind of swarm that you have with the Goblin Gang and the piglets and everything. So, you know, it stays alive for a long time, and that synergizes really well with the tanky units in this deck, like the Bowler and the Mega Knight. Obviously, you know, they're two really high health units in this deck. And, you know, those things run in the front, and they tank, and naturally behind them you're going to be having the Flying Machine, the Electro Dragon, and the Bowler just sniping stuff from afar, and before you know it, they're going to, you know, be living for so long that you'll have cycled back to another one, and you can get like 2 or 3 Flying Machines in the air, even though this isn't like a super fast cycle deck. What is it? It's a 4.3 cost deck. It's definitely not a fast cycle deck. It's a slow deck. But you'll see here, like, I'm able to, you know, just build up this massive wave of units. And the Bowler too, I mean, he stays alive for so long, he stays in the back, he pushes units back, so sometimes he's able to have them de-target him. And I mean, he's just naturally really beefy. He's got a high health pool, a really high health pool, so he just stays alive for a really long time. Alright, what else did I want to talk about here? You know, building up those units, allowing them to stack up, allowing multiple instances of them to stack up. And, oh yeah, the Lumberjack. Why is he in there? Well, I pointed out the Electro Dragon, which is not a card that has a whole bunch of splash synergy. The Lumberjack, he works really well for a number of reasons. That rage effect, first of all, is just huge. You get these huge swarms built up, so having that rage effect in this challenge can be very beneficial. And on top of that, you know, he runs in really quickly with the hogs, and if they're tanking for him, and like, you know, your opponent doesn't notice him, he can absolutely wreak havoc on their tower. He's also just a great defensive card, and this is a very defensive deck. I probably should have mentioned this sooner, but you're generally just going to be playing really hard defense, and then allowing your hogs and your unit buildup to naturally just overwhelm your opponent. And you've probably seen that in the replays already, because that's kind of what happened in those first few matches, if I'm not mistaken. So Lumberjack, he's got the rage effect, he's got the massive DPS, and he can sneak in with those hogs while they're tanking for him. And he's also a great defensive card because of his massive DPS. And then if he lives on defense, then he naturally will go on to offense and provide a lot of offensive threat. You can see this is going up against the Sparky here, and you'll see the Edrag. This is a good instance of the Edrag being able to counter that Sparky there. Alright, now what about the Goblin Gang? This one I was a little bit iffy about. This is the only one that I was like, okay, does this really fit in the deck too well? But honestly, I think it does. I think that you do need kind of a swarm card, like a Goblin Gang or a Skeleton Army or something. I mean, it just naturally counters the Hogs really well because it's got high DPS. Skeleton Army is a little bit higher, but Goblin Gang is just generally a little bit more of a preferred card in most cases over the Skeleton Army. It can attack air, it's a little bit more reliable, the goblins don't die to zap, etc, etc, etc. There's a lot of reasons. So Goblin Gang works out pretty well in this deck as your kind of swarmy card. If you're going up against a lot of splash damage units, like in this case I'm going up against a Mega Knight, so you'll notice that I'll do things like put my Mega Knight to distract his on one side, so his will be attacking mine on its right, and then I'll put the Goblin Gang behind his Mega Knight so that it doesn't get affected by his cleave damage. Because a Mega Knight, unlike a Valkyrie, will only do damage to units in front of it. It has kind of a cone effect, if that makes sense, like a cone area of effect radius kind of thing. Whereas a Valkyrie spins 360 and does damage to everything around her. So if you manage to put your Goblin Gang behind the swarm counter like that, then it can work out really well. It's just another kind of little tip to keep in mind in this particular challenge. I mean, just in general, but it works out well in this challenge because you're going to be going up against a lot of units that naturally are going to be be hard counters for swarm units. Like the Valkyrie, the Mega Knight, Dark Prince, so on and so forth. Dark Prince actually maybe not, but Mega Knight for sure. Alright guys, what about the two spells? We got two standard spells in this deck. We've got your classic Fireball Log combo, and it's just good, man. I mean, it works out really well. You often will find that, yeah, of course there's going to be big clumps of units, so having the ability to just clear it all out with a Fireball can be super beneficial. I feel like if you were running like an Executioner Tornado deck, you could run like Rocket, and that would work really well too. But in this case, we're just running the kind of relatively reliable and cheaper, medium cost spells. Okay guys, so you could totally replace those spells with something else if you wanted to, but other than that, there's not too many replacements that I would make in this deck. Like, each card has its own particular role. So, I often go into card replacements, but there's really no reason for this in this particular game mode because you have access to all the cards. If you're playing the Lunar Challenge, deck challenge, whatever it's called, the Hog Race Challenge, right? Then you do have access to pretty much every single card. No, every single card that's out right now. So there's no need really to replace it unless you're going for a matter of preference. If you decide, oh, I want to run Rocket or I want to run Tornado instead of Log or whatever, that's totally fine. You do what works for you. But I feel like each of the other cards, other than maybe those two spells, really were picked for really good reason. Goblin Gang, you got that swarm effect. Electro Dragon, it's going to counter Infernos. Lumberjack, I explained, high DPS, high offensive value, high defensive value, rage effect. Flying Machine, stays alive for a long time, snipes from the back, you get multiple of them stacked up. Bowler is super tanky, counters the swarm. Mega Knight, it's your main tank, counters the swarm. Like, each of these cards has a very specific role that works out really well in this deck for this challenge, other than maybe those two spell cards as I mentioned. So what about opening moves? It's a little bit different. It's a little bit different in this particular game mode because you have that consistent stream of hogs. So you might need to respond to like what they have. Maybe their hog is coming down the lane or something like that. Or their hog, yeah, their single one is coming down the lane because that's what it starts as. There's only one of them. So you may need to answer that. But honestly, the first one doesn't do too much damage. So if you are like me and you like to open and you don't want to wait for your opponent to do something, in this mode I feel like it works out really well because you have those hogs consistently going. You want to take advantage of that. It's not like a regular game mode where you're safe to not play anything until your opponent plays anything because essentially nobody's losing elixir in that case. In this case, you could be getting benefit from those hogs. So you want to try to take advantage of that. So if you do want to do that and go and open up with something rather than wait for your opponent, you could easily cycle a lot of different cards in the back. You could split your Goblin Gang. I would open with a slower unit like the Electro Dragon or the Flying Machine, maybe even the Bowler, although he's a little bit more expensive, rather than like the Lumberjack, because Lumberjack is really quick and he'll just kind of run into his death. And he plays a little bit more of an each role. Those other cards are a little bit more expendable, I feel like. And, you know, they're not super fast, so they'll stay alive and longer, rather, or take a little bit longer before they go into your opponent's side of the arena and just naturally die. So they have a longer time period where they provide that defensive value on your side of the arena and can naturally be like a predictive counter to whatever your opponent is going to be putting down. That is it for tonight's video, guys. Let me know what you think of this new layout. I tried to kind of simplify it because the last one I felt like there's just too much going on. Thanks so much for watching to the end here, guys. I appreciate all the support. Make sure to leave the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and have a good night.